Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned, my name is Bill Woodall. I was born April 27, 1926 in Kenmore District of Akron. I developed an interest in aviation early on. I read everything I could find in school. I built the balsa wood model airplanes, and I read the dime novels that you could get at the drugstore. Al Williams, who was a stunt pilot that had been in the Marine Corps, came to Akron one time with his Grumman Gulf biplane, put on an air show with some Navy dive bombers to boot, and I was sold. Well, at age 16, I got a job on the Ohio River in the summer building, the company was building mine planters for the Army. I didn't know they had any ships like that, but they actually had a bigger fleet than the Navy. Came back from that and went to work in a dime store during school. And then in the spring, I decided how to get into the war effort, so I went to Firestone and they hired me to go into their synthetic rubber plant. So I worked the summer and resigned to go back to school, and I'm a baby boomer from World War I, and we were on half-day sessions as far as being in school was concerned. So the boss said, could you work 4 hours? Well, tried it, and it worked. So after about a month of that, he said, could you work 8 hours? So I did. So I worked 8 hours a day, 7 days a week at the synthetic plant, riding my bicycle back and forth, and spent my senior year that way. Well, there was a neighborhood, or a boy walked past my house going to Kenmore who came from different school. I got acquainted with him and I gave him a big pitch about naval aviation. It must have really succeeded because he went to school during summer, graduated ahead of me, and got in this program. Well, after a bit he wrote me a letter and said, you know, if you want to get in this, you better apply. And he gave me the name of the Office of Naval Officer Procurement in Washington to write to. So I did. They responded, and while they still had their papers in hand, a recruiting team came for naval aviation to Kenmore High, and about 20 of us went in there and took some tests. And I was surprised at how many failed. I passed. Well, the officer said to sit tight and that the Navy would get a hold of you for further instructions. Well, that was counter to what I had in this other thing, so I went to him and he said, oh, if you've got something official, you follow that. So that led to a physical test in Cleveland. Again, I was in the minority that passed, and then they let us know that we would be going to Detroit for the final show. My dad didn't like airplanes, but he reluctantly signed off on this, that he let me enlist. I was 17. So I went to Cleveland, or to Detroit on a train, and surprisingly I passed there. The orders were to go back home, graduate, and wait for further orders. Well, they came June 1st about. I was sent to a naval training unit at Ohio Wesleyan University down here in Delaware, V-12. This was a officer training program which was modeled on the Naval Academy's approach, and you took 21 hours of work, and then on top of that you had military subjects, and you also had quite a bit of physical training. We wore regular Navy uniforms like we were sailors, and this was not my cup of tea at all. I wanted to get near an airplane. Well, I wasn't too bright, I guess. I found out that down at Columbus, Ohio, the Curtiss Wright Company had a big plant on the field where the Port Columbus is, and they were turning out SB-2C dive bombers, as well as an SC-1 Seahawk, and the airplanes that Goodyear was making for the Navy, the Corsair, were sent down there for naval acceptance flights. So if you got there early enough on Saturday and got in line, you might get a hopping with something. So I succeeded several times, and in the Helldiver. I sat in the back seat. You had a seat-packed parachute. You had to sit it down through a scarf ring, 230 calibers behind you. It looked important. Of course, I was just there for the ride. On one occasion, the dive brakes had failed previously and they were being tested, so we got out over Buckeye Lake at about 10,000 feet, and this guy peels off and down we go, and I thought I was going through the belly of the airplane when we came out of it, but it was a thrill to look up at the beach houses going by up above me on the beach as we sail out. Another occasion, I'm not sure how this was arranged, but we encountered a big formation of B-17 Flying Fortresses coming out of Lockbourne, which is now Rickenbacker, outside of Columbus, and we made a fighter pass through them. And I remember seeing all the machine guns aimed at us as we went through, But what really got my attention was the way we got tossed around. This is a pretty heavy airplane, but the prop wash and the slipstream from those bombers made us, we were like a cork. Well, anyway, that was another thrill. Another time, there was a fairing went from the back of the pilot's cockpit clear back to the fin that was up when you didn't need to use the machine guns. Well, I managed to get that to fall down in the middle of winter, and my Navy pea coat wasn't up to the job. I nearly froze. But the one thing that really got my attention, I could get in that seat all right, but getting out was something else. The seat pack parachute would pull up, and when you tried to stand up, it's on the other side of the ring and doesn't want to come through. It'd take you 5 minutes to get out. If we'd have ever had an emergency, I'd have gone down with the airplane. Well, finally, in June of 1945, I got orders to report to the Naval Air Station Memphis, which was a training facility for primary training. They had N2S5s. That's the steerman that the Army called a PT-13. But we were tarmacs, they call us. That's a seaman second. We got a little boost in pay, a couple bucks a month more, but we're still wearing the same outfits and pretty low on the totem pole. Memphis had several German POWs have been captured in North Africa that were there, and some Italians. They didn't seem to mingle much. They also had a Free French cadet group going through for naval pilots for the French Navy. General de Gaulle's son was one. He stuck out like a sore thumb. He was about 18 inches taller than the rest of them, and he had a nose like his dad. You could spot him a mile away. The airplanes, I say, were open cockpit biplanes, no radios, no flaps, and they were flying them in big numbers. The airplane was prone to ground loop because the wheels are kind of close together, and if you didn't correct for drift, you could get in trouble. There was a fatal accident there while I was there involving that. Their flight was coming back, probably 50 airplanes landing, and they're all close together. This one guy let a wingtip, kept functioning, and the propeller went through the rear cockpit. I remember being sobered by the fact that looking up at the trailing edge of that top wing it looked like rice, and that this had one time been brain. There was another fatal accident where a pilot coming back from the fleet borrowed one of the trainers to put on an air show for him, where it was a little bit of the scientific nature. Our jobs as tarmacs was to crank up the airplanes with hand inertia starters, tie them down at the end of flying, unsecure them in the morning, fill them up with gas. One of the things we did was put a board, about a 1x3 on each job, but he left the board on a right low wing. So when he went to take off, he needed the whole airport to get going. And then when he pulled up, he found he couldn't turn to the left like everybody else, but he sensibly got above everybody and circled to the right and then came in and made a really high-speed landing. The engineering staff at Memphis didn't think that a 4-panel steerman normally would fly on 3-panel, but he proved them wrong. Well, we had an awful lot of military drill going on. One of the guys that took us over said he'd been stationed at a pre-flight school, which was our next destination, and that he was going to make it so that when we got to pre-flight, the physical part of it was going to be a snap. He was going to bear down on us. We really like to hear that. But we did a lot of marching, and there was a band that existed before and after World War II, Fats Waller, and apparently the Navy had taken the whole crowd in as a unit because they were there. And occasionally they'd go out on the drill field at the same time we were drilling, and believe me, it's a lot better marching to something like that than some guy yelling Hup 2-3. Well, the battle for Okinawa had just recently ended, and there had been horrific casualties, and the kamikazes had come out as a weapon for the Japanese. So the idea that the war might be winding down was never a thought to anybody. We figured that we're in this for several more years. But then on August 6th of 1945, they said they dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Well, I, for one, had no idea what they were talking about. I know the British had something called a city buster that they dropped. I figured just a fancy name. But then they dropped another one on the 14th on Nagasaki, and on the 15th, Japan surrendered. Well, this caused great turmoil in the base because a lot of the cadets were going to take something called an option and go home, but we were in limbo. We weren't cadets. So anyway, we wound up staying there till September, and then they shipped us off to St. Mary's Pre-Flight School in California. It's it's east of Berkeley. We didn't put us in any hurry to get there. We just hooked on anything going west, freight trains, whatever, and eventually got there. Then it was a kind of a dry in the mouth time, because as we arrived, there was a petty officer who thought we were a draft of guys going out to the Pacific, and he was ready to put us on a ship. And then someone from St. Mary's overruled him, and we got on a bus. Got out in the country, and again, here's something that wasn't too expected. All these guys on crutches and in slings and bandages, and most of them yelling, "Take to the hills, they can't catch you all." Well, here we exchanged our clothes for more officer-like uniforms, and I've heard the expression that clothes make the man, or something like that. I saw a little bit that maybe there's some truth to that, because when you were pretending to be a sailor, you acted like you thought a sailor might act. When you put on the pants that creased in the front and the shirt that buttoned up the front, started a little more, well, a little more suave in the way you behaved, and a little more like you wanted to be respected. At pre-flight, we studied navigation, both dead reckoning and celestial. Every Navy pilot was his own navigator. You could be and be used as a navigator on larger airplanes if needed. Theory of flight, aircraft engines, aerology, that's what the Navy calls meteorology, physical education, or Morse code, and aircraft recognition, and of course lots of physical education. This was a big deal for this part of the deal. We had boxing, wrestling, judo, military track, basketball, swimming, water polo, football, soccer, gymnastics, and trampoline. I also had a big, great obstacle course. They didn't make us play baseball. I guess they assumed we knew that, but these other things we were supposed to get good in. Now, they had some pretty important people here. My swimming coach was Frank Leahy, who had been Notre Dame's football coach, and he went back and did that again after he left. And the Air Devil football team had lots of guys that had been in the pros and in the All-American ranks previous to this, and a lot of them got into the All-America conference when that football league developed. Our food wasn't as good as what I'd had any place before. I thought it would probably be better, but it wasn't. They'd start out with some scrambled eggs on a Monday morning, and by the time Friday rolled around and they had put all the peppers and all this stuff in to try to camouflage it, they failed. One of the things that would get you washed out, two things would get you washed out: navigation and swimming. They made it act like you might have to swim back to the carrier. But one of the things they wanted you to do was to swim the width of an Olympic-sized pool underwater with a surface dive. You couldn't kick off from the edge. Well, I just couldn't get that done. I'd get about 5/8 of the way across, and my lungs are busting, and I got to come up. Well, okay, one day some guy comes over with a clipboard and said, "Son, I want to see you do that." So this is going to be the end of it. I dived, and I guess I shut my eyes, and I kept going and going and going. This is going to be the worst performance I ever had, because there was always a streak of light would hit the middle of the pool when you were coming through the ceiling, and I didn't see that. And all of a sudden, bam, my head hit the other side. I'd kept my eyes shut, I guess, at the crucial time, and nothing wrong with my lungs. I just didn't believe myself. There was another case where we had to swim a mile. Now this takes a while, and it's pretty boring. You'd go down this pool, it's an Olympic pool, and around and around. And you weren't allowed to, if you stopped, you had to tread water. You couldn't touch the bank. Anyway, I'm plugging along there and calling out a number, and all of a sudden this guy with a clipboard said, "You, stop there." Said, "I've been watching you." Said, "You're not passing anybody, and you got too many laps." About that time, a guy, now my name's Woodall, a guy named Woodall swam by and called out the same number, so that kind of resolved the issue. He straightened things out, and I got through it. We also had to go on a survival hike. He went out and lived in the mountains for 3 days on K rations. And one of the things that the property out there was plentiful equipped with was poison oak. Now, I had never seen this before, but poison ivy didn't seem to bother me, but poison oak was something else. Most everybody got it on their fingers. I did on mine, and if you weren't real careful, in other activities, you might transfer it to some really sensitive spot. If that happened, you probably went back to sick bay in an ambulance. Well, I graduated, and I had a first cousin who was in the Waves. She was a lieutenant commander, and I understand she actually worked on a Japanese code breaking when that was going on. But she was based at Oakland. I got a hold of her, and she invited me out to dinner, and I met a Navy pilot, all covered up with ribbons, and I tried to apologize for my not having done anything. And he got all over me that the reason I hadn't done anything was because the likes of him hadn't been killed as fast as they thought they were going to be. So he didn't want to hear this. Well, anyway, next day we went out on the bay, out to the bay, and went on board the carrier Intrepid. The Intrepid had been hit by a kamikaze, and the damage was very apparent. They were repairing it. And of course, the Intrepid then stayed in the service. They put a canted deck on it, and it's now a museum in New York Harbor, and one of the space shuttles is headed there, I guess. But anyway, it was sobering to see what action had done to that ship. Off on the horizon was the USS Saratoga, which I had always admired as was one of our first big carriers. It had been damaged, but it was being repaired, and unfortunately its next action was going to be an atomic bomb target at Bikini Atoll, and I think it's under the water there yet. Well, when I finally I graduated, I say, I was given leave to go home, and then told I'd be reporting to NAS Glenview, Illinois. So I did that, and when I got to Glenview, it turned out it had been a bad winter in Glenview, and the students who were flying there had been not able to get their hours in, so we were putting something called AFT, aft. That means to the rear, but it also meant awaiting flight training. Gave them an excellent opportunity to bear down on the swimming and some of the theory of flight stuff. And one of the theory of flight deals, I heard two instructors sort of get at each other. They were talking about what happens when an airplane takes off. The theory in the book was it becomes a part of the air mass, and it's just like a balloon drifting around. The wind will cause you to go sideways or faster or slower, but that's all. This one guy said he'd seen an airplane crash, that he thought maybe something else went on, but I'll get up to that later, but nobody gave this much credence. Well, the night they finally decided that we were about ready to go, the night before we went down, they had some night flying. There was a mid-air collision, and 4 guys got killed. So we marched down to the flight line, and we were stopped beside 2 trucks, and here were 2 N2S3s. Now these are the ones the Army called PT-17s. They were Continental engine in them, but basically the same airplane. Up on the truck, and some of the guys who had had different tarmac duty than me got the idea right now that maybe this is a little more dangerous than we thought, you know. That, well, I had seen the Memphis stuff, so I knew this went with the territory. It was probably March, early April, that we finally got issued some flight gear. And in the winter, they wore shearling stuff that would really keep you warm, because these airplanes are open and no heaters. But we got the intermediate stuff. And this was being given out by a storekeeper. And he said, you know, man, he said, I've been in the Navy quite a while, and he says, they always do things alphabetically. He said, my name's in the back, and I resent that, so I'm going to turn it around. We're going to give out the flight gear to the back of the alphabet first. So they did. I got a well-worn flight jacket and a couple of helmets, and by the time they got to Cadet A Guard, they'd run out of all the new stuff, all the old stuff, and he got the new stuff. So go figure. We had 2 helmets. One was a solo helmet, and the other was a dual helmet. Now the dual helmet had big ear pads on it, and into that plugged a hose, and then that went to another hose which went up under the dashboard, came up through the instructor's feet, and then hooked to a sack that went around his mouth. This was called the Gosport system. It had been done or invented in Gosport, England in World War I, and hadn't been improved on. You could hear the guy pretty good, but you couldn't say anything back. You just nod your head or cuss at him, and he could look at it. You could look at him in the mirror. But so anyway, I was introduced to my instructor. He was a Marine, first lieutenant. He had been a corporal, and he got a battlefield commission to first lieutenant on Guadalcanal. He resented the fact that they had made an officer out of him because he preferred the enlisted side. He had been a Corsair pilot, and he had flown at Okinawa. He didn't like being an instructor, but he was putting up with it. Big guy from Georgia, nice guy. So when it came out for my first lesson with him, I expected to fall victim to what everybody else said happened. They'd go out and show you who's boss and try to make you sick, and then from then on you're kind of tame. Well, that didn't happen. We got up to a relatively low altitude, went out to a field. He got on the Gossport and he said, now I want you to put your hand on a stick and your feet on the rudder just lightly. And he said, just barely on the throttle. And he said, follow me through and we're going to land. So he talked all the way around as we went, and the airplane made a decent landing. It was a little bumpy, and then he said, okay, I got it, and he took off again. We got in the air and he said, I want you to know I wasn't on the controls at all. You did that yourself. He said, I think you can learn this. So that was a big boost. And now these airplanes were kind of blind from the instructor's standpoint. He's sitting under the top wing and you're in the back. You've got a better view around. And the word was out that if you saw something happening that you thought he didn't know about, and maybe you should, you shook the stick and pointed. Well, we were on our, I don't know, about the second flight, and up above me, here's a guy spinning down right at us. So I shook the stick and he banked the airplane around and looked. When he saw this airplane come out, he went after him. Now, you're not supposed, they pounded it in this, so there's no dogfighting to be done in this stage of the game, because you could kill yourself just as dead as if it was for real. Well, we dogfight. And he was a better pilot than the other guy was. I had one hand on the seat belt release and the other on the D-ring, because I thought if I survived the collision, I might have a chance. Well, we never hit him, but he never got away from us. And finally, we flew away. And he never mentioned this when we got back and had our talk about the flight. This was just something that happened. But I'll bet those other guys had a talk about making clearing turns, about to make sure there's nobody underneath you when you do some kind of a maneuver. One of the things that I felt was unique to me, spins were instructed then. They don't even teach a spin anymore, but a spin is an accident, or it can be deliberate, out of control condition for the airplane. It stalls and it'll fall off on one side and it'll corkscrew to the earth if you don't do anything about it. So he told me to read the book on it, about third or fourth flight, I guess. I did, went up and we practiced them, and the idea was to line up on a road and then stall it and then kick rudder and have it go around, and you counted the road as you saw it come past. And the idea was to make a two-turn precision spin, come out right on heading. Well, I did pretty well on this. I mean, reasonably well. So he took over the airplane and flew back, and as I say, I've never heard of anybody getting this bit put to their spin instruction. I thought he was a smoker, and I thought we were going to go down and he was going to have a cigarette, because he got down quite low, leveled the airplane out, banked us all the way, a knife edge bank to the right, yanked the stick back, kicked left rudder, closed the throttle, and yelled, "You got it." Well, the airplane stalled and went over the top, and Lord, I didn't know how much room it took to get out. I went through the maneuvers that I had done up high, and I swear we weren't 50 feet off the ground when we got out of that. And he said, well, so I guess you got the word on spins, let's go home. I don't know what this was for. I guess it would tell you that if you got in a traffic pattern, which was about that height, and the airplane got away from you, if you did it right, you could live through it. But how he had the guts to do that, I mean, I'm just a rookie here, and he's in front of me, and he's going to have the engine in his lap. We're both going to die, but he's going to go first. But anyway, my first solo came as a complete surprise. The Navy way was you flew about 7 hours. You then rode with a check pilot, and if he gave you an up, you then rode with your instructor, and if he gave you an up, then you went soloing. Well, I inherited a guy named Black, Ensign, and we went out for a practice ride, and I went through what he did, he told me, and then he landed the airplane, and I was startled. He unbuckled and climbed out, and I thought he must be a real smoker, you know, but he left the engine running, unhooked his parachute, and he started to walk away, and then he comes back and says, "You think you can fly this thing?" Well, I'm thinking, yeah, I got to fly for my instructor, and it's down the road. Yes, sir. Okay, he says, 2 touch and goes and a full stop. Well, a touch and go is where you just get on the ground and take off again, and a full stop is, he said, and don't bend it up because that's the only way home. Well, I got 12 feet of hose hooked to my helmet here, and there's no place to put it. I reeled it up, and I taxied out, and I thought there's a lever called a tail wheel lock. These airplanes had lockable tail wheels for takeoff and landing. So I thought, okay, I'll stick it up under there, and slammed it down. Well, the thing's like a rocket ship with nobody aboard but me compared to the way it had been. The airplane took off, you know, right now, and it's climbing like mad, and all of a sudden there was this tremendous explosions in my head. I thought I'd run into somebody. I swung my head back and forth, and okay, here's this blasted hose. It's back pounding on the fuselage. So I wound the thing up and held it with my left hand and performed what I was going to do. And I came back and landed, and he taxied up, a big grin on his face, you know, and congratulated me on doing this. And then it began to sink in. I'm the first guy in my class to solo. Wow, you know. So he said, let's go home. So I took off. Now, we'd had lots of practice of emergencies, that they'd close the throttle at all kinds of points, and you're supposed to retain control of the airplane and make it, you're going to be able to land it. Well, anyway, I'm climbing out, big head and all of a sudden the engine began to splutter and quit. Now, the other times the throttle had been closed and you felt it coming, you knew what was happening. The engine just quit. I was about to hit the only tree in the whole area when he took over and got us back, and that brought my head back down, and we went home. But I can remember more about that blown saved or on the emergency than the flight, really. I had just barely soloed, and then one of the things, there was some formation work done later on, but I was climbing out gingerly, and all of a sudden this airplane came up from my tail on the right and kept getting closer and closer and closer, and finally stuck his low wing was in between my tail assembly and my right low wing. And I looked over, and it's there's an instructor in the front of this thing. Well, I'm in a no-win situation. If I sit here, he could turn me in for permitting dangerous flying, but if I peel off, I'm a chicken. Well, I decided I'd rather be a chicken in the program than the other way, so I bailed out. And when I got back and was undressing after the flight, there was some cadet there chuckling over how they'd spooked a student that morning, and I let him know it was me, and I also let him know I didn't think too much about that. This was not fair. I was coming back from flight one time, and a guy jumped up on the wing and looked in to make sure my fire extinguisher's in there. Turns out somebody had been doing aerobatics, their fire extinguisher fell out, went right through somebody's roof and blew up in the basement. Well, mine was there, so. Another occasion, I ran up and wanted to know if I'd seen either of two numbers. Now, our airplanes were painted yellow, except they had big black numbers on them. Well, I hadn't seen either one of these. Well, then the word began to drift around the scuttlebutt that it was been in midair. So we expected I lost two more guys, and then as the day wore on, no, they were all right. They were coming back. And then I got it straight from one of the culprits, what had happened. This guy I knew he was a mess up in pre-flight school. But anyway, he decided to do a loop in an area where everybody was supposed to fly straight and level. Well, as he came out the bottom of the loop, there's a guy coming at him. So he stood on a rudder pedal and slid sideways, and his tail assembly crashed into this other guy's wing. Well, both of them went into spins, and the guy with the wing damage didn't have much problem. He got it out and landed. The other guy worked with the trim tab and got the airplane under control, recovered, and climbed up to say, we're going to go up to 3,000 feet and bail out. Well, he got to 3,000 feet, and he chickened out. He decided that it was flying pretty well, so he brought it back down with just the trim tab and landed at the same field the other guy did. When the other guy saw this airplane come in all bad, and his whole left stabilizer and everything was just folded up against the rudder. He was going to kill him, but this guy calmed him down and says, now look, we're both going to get washed out if you don't do what I say. So this was an unavoidable accident. And so they stuck to that. The safety officer had a fit, but he couldn't prove anything, so that's the way it went. This is just not any importance, but we were up on a windy day. I think solos weren't allowed to fly, but my instructor kept slowing the airplane down, slowing it down, slowing it. I'm cold, and what are we doing this for? Finally, he pointed over in the low wing, and he said, look, the ground was moving backwards under us, so the wind was blowing us harder than we were flying through the air, and he thought this was some kind of a neat thing to do. Another occasion, he was fiddling around up in the front seat with something, and all of a sudden he swore and he said, I got it, and we peeled off in a really hairy power dive. He seemed to be looking for something over on his right, and we finally, he saw something. I saw something there too. He maneuvered the airplane over to where he got the right low wing under that thing, and it stuck. So then he tried to gingerly bring the plane out, but it blew off. I think it was some cigarette lighter or something he had from VMF 323, his combat squadron, and he was really upset about it. But it kind of drove home. You don't want to be fooling around in the airplane with something like, if you've got any value to it. We had a program where we, well, another thing he did that I didn't particularly like. His sense of humor wasn't the same as mine, but he gave me an emergency over a big plowed field, and there was a farmer plowing down below with a tractor. Well, he set me up so that I was chasing the tractor, and I couldn't touch the throttle. So we were whistling in there behind this guy, and he made a couple of looks at us and decided we were going to hit him, and he bailed off the tractor and started running for the side of the field, and then of course he put the power back on and he had his chuckle, but I don't think the farmer would have thought this was too funny. We did something called S turns to a circle. This was a precision flight maneuver where you had a 50-foot diameter circle lined out on the ground. You're supposed to come in at 800 feet, close the throttle, set up a glide, and make a steep left turn past the circle, wind it on around, and then make a right turn back, and when you roll out the right turn, you should be over the circle and land. If you got the wheels in, the main wheels, that was a hit. If you got the tail wheel in, that was a hit. And if you got the whole airplane, that was great. But if you undershot and then overshot, that was okay too, because you were correcting. Anyway, I'm in line with about 20 other guys coming around here to do this, and started my turn to the left, and then all the planes ahead of me went every direction you can think of. And then I looked back, and here's a guy coming in, landing crosswind to all of us. Well, it was about the end of the day. I went back and I was undressing, and I mentioned that somebody really blew up the pattern out of Barrington. The guy said it was me. He said he was up doing aerobatics, and when he finished a slow roll, he couldn't get the stick forward. So when he saw the field down there, he landed the airplane. Well, the stick would go back, but it wouldn't go forward. The belts in the front seat are always supposed to be tight. Well, his had been, somebody had left them too loose. When he got upside down, they got in front of the stick, and then he couldn't move it. But he risked a lot of other people running into him by trying to do something like that. We also did something called slips to landing. I'm not sure this was taught in the Army, because I scared the devil out of an Army instructor after the war doing one. But you would turn these airplanes on their side, as they had no flaps, and let it fall sideways. And you'd cross control it so that you kept the nose headed in the right direction. And then when the wing was about 18 inches from hitting the ground, you'd let go of everything, and the airplane would swing around and land. Well, these were kind of fun. Well, I was out doing these one day, and the sky started to look funny. I decided I'm going home. I got up, and you're supposed to be at a certain altitude to carry out your transit flights. Well, I got lower than that before I got into cloud, and then all of a sudden I felt the airplane shudder, and I heard a tremendous roar, and I looked up, and the wheels and the propeller of another airplane went right over me. Oh boy, we almost hit. So I dropped down out of the overcast and made it for home safely, and then I found everybody else was doing the same thing. Now, on that subject, I'd like to mention what the Navy did, since these airplanes didn't have radios, to announce a weather emergency if one happened while a flight was out. All of our planes were painted yellow except two. These were painted white with black stripes. And the deal was, if you saw one of them flying, that meant solo recall. Anybody out by themselves to go home. If the two of them were in formation, they go back, everybody goes. Well, I saw the after effects of that one time down at Memphis, where a big thunderstorm came up in the afternoon. They sent out the dual recall. Well, they got out to the fields all right, and people came back in a big hurry. But by the time they made it back, and they made sure everybody else was gone, the winds were really picking up, and we got to see two really major ground loops by experienced pilots. The Navy insisted on three-point landings, because this was what you were going to be doing with a tail hook later on. And nobody did wheel landings. They might have got away with this with that. Well, in aerobatic stage, we were trained to do slow rolls, snap rolls, split S, wing overs, loops, Immelmans, cartwheels, and we're shown an inverted spin. That's where you turn it upside down and stall it, and it spins. And the recovery procedure is, the rudder is the same, but the stick's different. Well, my first solo attempt at an Immelman. Now, an Immelman is a half loop with a half roll on top of it. And it's intended to actually gain altitude in the maneuver and head you the other direction. Well, I got my airspeed up, and you ram the throttle full forward and pull it back, and then as the airplane gets upside down, the gasoline shuts off and it quits. But You're supposed to look back over your head as far as you can and catch the horizon and then make a judgment when you're about level. Well, I missed my judgment. I wasn't nearly level, and I pushed the stick forward to stop the loop. The airplane went up in a vertical climb, stalled, aerodynamically stalled. The engine wouldn't run. And I knew it was going to fall backwards, and I'd heard you could tell the elevators off if you did that. So I got the stick in the middle and just became a passenger. Eventually, it started to spin like the devil, and gasoline was hitting me in the face. Now, as I say, the tank was in the top wing, and when we did that inverted spin, that had happened then, so I decided I was in an inverted spin. So I corrected for the spin, pulled back on the stick, and about that time the engine came back on. The throttle was still full forward, well past the red line on RPM and also airspeed. Well, I yanked the throttle back and hoped the thing would hold together. Felt like I was going through the bottom when it came out. I grayed out a little bit, and I zoomed back up to about where I started and leveled off. And I began to try to think through here what happened. And I sure hope no Navy guy had seen this. This was, you know, not something that you'd want to advertise, especially the inverted spin part. But I thought, you know, somebody on the ground would think he really saw a pro at work. You know, here's a continuous action, a part of a loop to a vertical climb, a hammerhead stall, a tail slide, inverted spin, a split S, and then zoom back up to the altitude. You know, that's what you'd go to an air show to see. But I didn't tell anybody about this because I didn't want to advertise the fact that I had done an inverted spin without permission. Now, I never used my parachute, but I'll have to admit one time I thought I might. I was doing a slow roll, and as I got almost inverted, the cuff on my jacket caught something down there in my lap. And well, the only thing that should be down there is the latch on the seat belt. Well, too late to stop. Well, I didn't fall out, so it went on around through, and I looked at, it was a ball, spring-loaded ball held a lever in place. It had almost come loose. Now, I never did make a parachute jump, but I'll have to tell you this, I was thinking big time about, will this thing work or not? You know, the anxiety was still there. One of the officers was in charge of morale, I guess, for the base, and he decided it was time to have a dance. So he called Northwestern University, and they sent a bus over and brought a whole bunch of co-eds over, playing some music and so forth, but there wasn't any mixing going on. Cadets were all standing over on one side, and the girls were all on the other. So this guy gets on a bullhorn, ordered the cadets to all get in ranks and stand at attention. Then he ordered the women to come over and pick somebody. Well, a nice young lady came over and said she wanted me, and I was flattered. We danced the evening out, had a pretty good time. A couple of days later, I got informed that the captain wanted to see me. Now, a Navy captain is way up there, and I would not normally see him except in his limousine or something. And I couldn't figure out what in the world I had done that merited this. I didn't have any demerits. I went over and ramrod attention. They led me in his office, you know, and he's standing there, he's sitting there fiddling with some papers, and he looked up at me and he busted out laughing. He said, "Son, you must have really made an impression on some young lady." He said, "She took the occasion to call my office to get a hold of you. She wants you to call her." So, well, I was plenty embarrassed. I went out, and he was still laughing when I left. Well, I got a hold of her, and she wanted me to come to a sorority date. Well, okay, I thought I could, but sometime in the middle of the week, we had a code test where you're taking Morse code. Now, you can take Morse code by counting the dits and the daws after you've memorized the thing to about 8 words a minute. Anything beyond that, you're in trouble. Well, this was going to be at 12, and I knew I couldn't pass. So I gave up. I'm sitting there thinking how I'm going to break this to her. She's going to, you know, whatever arrangements she's made are going to go down the tube. And I look down, and my hand is taking the code perfectly. It turns out I could take code up to 30 words a minute. It's just you got to get the subconscious doing it and get the conscious out of it. Same way with the swimming. You know, you can do better than you think you can. Well, we had another important technique that was taught to us. We use the same circle like you slip the S-turn to, but this is called a power approach to a circle. This is what the Navy had decided was a way to get on an aircraft carrier. You flew a racetrack pattern around the ground, and you slowed the airplane down to 5 knots below the normal glide speed, and you held it there with the engine. So that in order to control your altitude, you did that with a throttle, and to control your airspeed, you did it with a stick. And you could let yourself down, and you could hit that circle every time. And these were fun, and I thought relatively safe. But there was the possibility of getting too slow and too steep a turn. And one guy figured that out, and he spun in, and the airplane exploded, and he burned. I know it was sobering to know that he got his wings in commission and was sent home in a closed casket with a military escort. But this was our 5th fatality in a rather short period of time. The war was over, and Glenview was going to become the center of a big naval air reserve, and they began flying in patrol bombers, dive bombers, fighters, and torpedo bombers. And then they dedicated the program. They must have had, I don't know how many thousand people came out and stood around the outskirts of the field. But this one Corsair pilot, attempting to show off a little bit, he hit the gear up switch while he was still taking off. Well, that's okay. The gear would then rotate and come up quick, except he wasn't the first plane in the Armada. He caught prop wash from the plane ahead of him, slammed him back down to the ground. The prop hit the ground. You heard a big whang, and then the landing gear was bent. Had to stop the whole program, and he came around, and fortunately the prop must have bent very uniformly because it didn't vibrate out of the airplane. But he pulled that off, but I wonder what he pulled off when the Admiral talked to him about doing some kind of thing like that. They also dedicated a few of these trainers for officers to fly if they wanted. And I one morning was standing in front of the ready room, and one of these taxied by with 2 officers in it. They went down to them. Now, we flew off a thing called mats. They are big octagonal blocks of asphalt, so you could take off pretty much into the wind regardless. Well, this airplane started its takeoff run, and it seemed to take forever. I mean, finally the tail came up, and then the airplane kept coming and coming and coming, and then it left the ground, and it wasn't climbing. And I couldn't figure out what was, you know, this should have been aborted long before this, but he got the airplane in the air, and he got about 150 feet up, and he's coming right at the tower and the barracks and stuff that are back there. Well, we were told if something goes wrong on takeoff, you put the nose down and try to not hit anything too solid. Well, he didn't do that. He kept climbing. Then he leveled it off, and he did a turn to the right. Now, I'm right under the airplane almost. I could see it shaking like it was about to stall. Well, then he made the 90-degree turn, and I thought, well, he's got it made. All he's got to do now is throttle back and land on a taxiway that's right in front of him. But he didn't do that. He decided to turn back again. Well, this time it didn't work. The right wing stalled, and the airplane went over the top into a spin to the left, and made about 1/8 of a turn and then slammed into the ground. And the airplane bounced high enough that it went up to, I must have gone 20 feet in the air, came back down on its gear, and the engine fell out, and it was on fire. Well, he'd ripped the gas lines loose from the top wing tank, and and this gasoline was pouring out, you know, headed for the engine. Well, one of the ground crewmen came running out. He jumped up on the wing walk and turned off the gas, and then he assisted these guys out. I thought they were both dead, but I got a real respect for shoulder harness. Both of these guys were able to walk. One guy had a bloody nose because his was a little too loose and he'd hit the dash. But the thing that really got me was, here was a pair of guys that had had the training I've had. They knew what they should do and shouldn't do, but when a real emergency happened, they did the wrong thing. Would I do that? I hope not. But anyway, that was what I gleaned from that. We had an event when I was up in the tower, and a Hellcat came in, a Grumman F-6 fighter plane, came in to get some gas. And this will go back to something I said previously. The day was, you know, sort of unsettled. Wind was blowing. This guy was landing right into the wind. Just as he got over the fence, the windsock did a 180, and he hit the throttle, and the airplane just dropped. He hit the throttle and tried to stop it, but it didn't. Hit the ground, he blew out a tire, bent his landing gear, and he's gone. He's still got a lot of ground speed, and he's running out of airport. But he firewalled it and jumped the fence at the end of the field. Then he was aimed at a house. He zoomed up over the house and then down in the yard, and then he had to clear some telephone wires. He managed to get the thing out of there and came around and landed the other way. And then when he did this, he did a beautiful job. He knew which side was hurt, kept it on one side, and as it got slowed down, finally fell over where he didn't have a wheel, and then it spun like a top. But anyway, here was an example of wind shear that had been demonstrated big time. And I decided that the guys that write the books ought to get out and look at the real world and not just do this from sitting around a table. Well, during aerobatic instructions, I had occasionally gotten airsick. This had invariably been on my first exposure to a maneuver, always dual, never happened to solo, like that wild ride I had, and the dog fight didn't bother me. But anyway, I get sick. Well, my instructor didn't pay much attention to this. I could still fly the airplane, and I just had to clean it up when I got back. Well, one day he didn't ride with me. I went up with another guy, and I got sick. He reported me. So they had a meeting with my instructor, and I think he caught some grief for what he had put up with. Well, then they transferred me to another instructor. This guy was dynamically opposite. The Georgia guy was calm and collected. If he said something that would get my attention, this guy was a wild man all the time, and he had me on the edge of the seat. Well, I got sick again, so I got grounded. I had to sit around for several weeks while they were, till a advisory board of officers met. Well, I thought I could talk my way through this, but I was getting discouraged. All the guys I was with had moved on to intermediate, and I had other people coming in, and it was not a good situation. So I had the meeting, explained what my side of it, and they obviously didn't believe me. But they said, now you've got one more resort, so you can go before the captain. Well, I was mad and discouraged, and I said, no, sir, I will abide by your decision. Well, they tried to talk me into going to the captain. Well, I didn't. So before I went to Separation Center, I talked to a pilot who had been flying in the early days of the war, and he reminisced with me, and he said, you know, if they'd have kicked all the guys out that got airsick back when we started this thing, he said, hey, we wouldn't have had anybody. He said, everybody, you're worried, you're doing violent maneuvers, you got gun smoke, everybody got sick. You got over it. And I read later, or I heard Eddie Rickenbacker describe it, that every trip he made over the lines when he first started flying, he got violently airsick. And then one day it stopped and he never had it again. Well, anyway, I was discharged on July 14th, 1946. I came back and renewed my acquaintance with Firestone. They made me a tire builder while I was going to college. Graduated from college, came back, got a job with them in the engineering area. Got married, had 3 kids, got 6 grandchildren. I also got my pilot's license early on, and until the November of this last year, I had a medical, and I flew some. I never got airsick again, and I wonder what might have happened if I had gone and seen the captain, but it was a deal that I guess I'll never know. And certainly if I hadn't coaxed this other guy into telling me about writing to get in the Navy, that wouldn't have happened. Because none of the other guys at Kenmore ever heard from the Navy again. And a lot of them went in the little more, well, more dangerous spots. I've got a little poem I'd like to read you about those days. Primary duel. I miss those sounds of engines round that rumbled in the sky. Inertia starters hums and screams and the prop blades flashing by. The swirls of smoke as the engines spoke as they began their day. The firings then more rhythmic when pooled oil had burned away. The throbbing cadence idols made, each plane set in space. Instructor saluted a cadet salute and climbed into the foremost place. With chocks away, the dance began with signals from the ground. The roaring blasts at the throttles moved the biplanes turning round. En masse we taxied toward the mat to await our turns to fly. Upwind the air was turning black as Stearmans filled the sky. 3 abreast we'd blast away with seats as high as they'd go, nostrils flared by the prop blast sting or the windscreen down below. Goggled eyes took in the scene that our twisting necks allowed. The bouncing annex along each side we climbed with a launching crowd. Less wind in the face with a seat in place when that magic height we'd reach. The instructor's voice through the cossport hose spelled out what he would teach. Only way to meet his eye was to gaze at the silvered glass and nod or signal with our hands that his wish would come to pass. When the hop was done, we'd had our fun, we'd head back for the base. Like bees to a hive, the sky was live as we droned to find our place. Then one day by one we'd start our turn when a plane was off our wing, and down we'd go to that mat below and hear the brace wires sing. With planes in front and planes behind and several more alongside, we'd strive to hit the mat just right, no side slips in our glide. We'd fan the rudder left and right as the tail wheel did its things, tried hard to keep our course dead straight as the lift would leave our wings. Then back to our parking place we'd go, S-turning all the way, then through the spot to blast around the park within the day. Then up the steps on the cowl ahead to that safety walk with the nose, we'd take a seat on the leading edge and await the gas truck's hose. When the tank was full, reverse our course and head for the ready room, where instructors wait to review our hop and speak with hands that zoom. Each day a test, but we did our best to fulfill what was a dream. Though pressure intense in a disciplined sense, we were part of a worthy team. In my old age, I look back now with memories sharp and clear, as if my life had stood stock still and the long ago were near. Well, I don't suppose there are any questions. I didn't do anything, so that's why I say I dreaded my children asking me what I did in the big war, so I didn't do much. But yeah, I did. Yeah, I had a girl back home, and I told her so nothing was going to happen here. But maybe as that turned out, I'd been better off staying with her. But.
I'm not a pilot. I don't think I'll ever be a pilot, but I feel like I've flown a bit tonight.
Well, I'm sure nobody got airsick, so that was good.
That's good. Could you tell us a bit about this Sopwith triplane?
Okay. I guess never wanting to have been a fighter pilot, never making it big time, and the opportunity to fly a fighter. It's pretty expensive if you're going with a World War II. You've got to have some money just to start the engine up. Well, anyway, I was, I say, fascinated by World War I. So I researched what kind of an airplane I might build that represented that period. And one that seemed to have had a rather sparkling combat record, hardly heard of, but pilots liked it, and it was safe, seemed to be, because the British used it for experimenting with high G turns where pilots would black out and the airplane would recover and fly itself in the event that happened. Well, this was a Sopwith triplane. Now, not too many people realize that the Allies actually had the first triplanes out. Everybody knows about the Red Baron's German triplane, the Fokker, but it would never have been an airplane had this one not preceded it. The Germans felt this was the toughest airplane they were up against. They wanted something like it. Well, anyway, I sent to, my company had an office in London and also a plant. And I got a hold of one of the guys there and asked him if he'd check with Hawker Siddeley to see if Sopwith triplane blueprints were available. Well, he did, and they were, and I bought them. And I was surprised to find out how much detail they went in. This was designed in August of 1916. But they had a stress analysis of the wings. It was stressed for 4 Gs, or 6 Gs positive, no, 8 Gs positive, 4 Gs negative, which is pretty good. Anyway, I started building it. It took me 18 years to get it done. I tried to stay to the blueprints as much as possible. I didn't use a welded steel tube fuselage like would have been a big help. I made it with wood and wire and lots of turnbuckles, or strainers as the British call them. Well, anyway, I've flown it a couple times. It has a rotary engine on it. Now, that's not a Mazda rotary. This is one where the crankshaft is fastened to the airplane and the 9 cylinders spin around it, and the propeller is fastened to the front of that. There's a lot of lies out about them that you can't throttle them or anything. My Larone will throttle down to 400 RPM and accelerate. There was one rotary model made that didn't have a throttle, and that's the only one you hear about. They think the whole thing was that way, but there was a lot of engineering went into it. And I think that the horsepower ratings given the rotaries were understated. If this has only got 80 horsepower according to the specs, but if I were to put a newer engine on one where the crankshaft turns around, you'd have to at least double the horsepower to get the performance out of it that this thing delivers. It's, well, anyway, there's some pictures that I guess Jack was out, or one of the fellows here was out yesterday, and her as well, and you can see what this is out at Maps. I'm hanging it out there, and probably won't fly it anymore. I'm 86, and I think my reflexes are probably slowed down enough it wouldn't be a good idea. And the insurance companies kind of tell you what you can do aviation-wise as you get older. And if you get to be about 70, they frown on anybody leaving the ground except in somebody else's airplane. So. Any other? Sir?
How do you do a roll?
Have what?
Do a roll.
Well, you got a stick and rudder. So do a snap roll, you're actually doing a spin about the horizontal axis. You stall the airplane sharply and then throw the stick into it and kick some rudder as it goes, and it snaps around. Then you recover almost as you're starting to finish the roll, you're recovering. A slow roll is just done by pushing the stick over and keeping the nose on the horizon and just rolling about the axis. Of course, in this airplane I was flying, the engine's going to quit when it gets upside down. It's going to get a little bit sluggish as you finish. But
Well, you use right ailerons and right rudder both in the same direction, or do you cross the control?
well, you're actually watching what the nose is doing, and you use the rudder to compensate for whatever the nose is trying to do. You want to try to keep it on a point. So you may use both sides of the rudder, but you'll only use one kind of aileron for roll left or roll right. Speaking of ailerons, the triplane's got 6 of them. I guess they figured if 2 are good, 6 would be even better. But one thing that airplane has, they put the hinge on the wrong side. Normally the hinge on an aileron is on the top surface, so when you move it, there isn't any gap developed. On this airplane, a great big gap develops, and when you're trying to lift the wing, you've actually killed a lot of the lift. So it took a while to figure that out. And you rudder that airplane around. Sir?
Have you seen a maneuver called a Lomsheva?
I've seen it. I never tried that. That's the headache, yeah.
I know a pilot that has done it. And I asked him, what do you do with the controls? He says, well, you start it up into a stall, and then you try to do a snap roll.
Okay, a vertical.
And
Huh?
that causes the airplane to move.
Okay. Well, I understood that was checked for headache, and a Czech pilot was the first one that performed it, I think. Okay, well, thank you for your attention.